welcome to this very important occasion for us at CSIC, the distinguished lecture. Before I say some words about our lecturer, can I first of all tell you about this wonderful report that's just the annual review for 2018 that has just hot off the press. I hope you will all have picked up a copy. If you haven't, there are more copies on the desk outside. It's a huge credit to Didi Frawley and Lisa Millard, who have really put all of the work into it. But of course, Jennifer Schooling, our director, has overseen all of that. But you'll find in this an awful lot of information about what CSIC has been doing and indeed is continuing to do. So we're very lucky this evening to have Anne Kemp, Dr. Anne Kemp, to be our distinguished lecturer. She is a director and fellow at Atkins. She tells me that she did her PhD originally on soil computation and soil erosion. That's something very close to my heart. So she's a geotechnical engineer, really, at least in origin. She's very well known for leading on the BIM strategy and implementation of BIM, Building Information Monitoring. She's chair of the UK BIM Alliance and Building Smart UK. And if that's not enough, she's also convener for ISO, the International Standards Organization, for BIM. So she is the convener for ISO. So she really is an absolute expert on BIM. And you can tell from the title of her lecture that we're in for a very interesting talk, a very interesting lecture, a glimpse into the future by considering the past, the challenges, the opportunities, and our consciences. So, Anne, we have great pleasure in inviting you to deliver your lecture.
Thank you, everyone, for coming inside on an absolutely fantastic summer's evening to listen to the lecture today. So I can only hope that I do justice to you. I am told, and I'm quite excited about that, is that if anyone starts to doze off, I can actually pick this up and throw it at you. So just be aware is that I do quite like to interact with the audience. So just bear it in mind. But let's move on now. I'm actually a geographer and became a geomorphologist with my research. And you'd wonder why on earth I'm ending up in the land of BIM. Hopefully you'll start to understand that as I go through the lecture now. But what I really want to be discussing is, here we are in the Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction. That's quite daunting for me. I feel I'm going to be speaking to the converted here. But I do want us to really look at what we mean by smarter infrastructure, what we're aiming to achieve through that. Are we actually in the right mindset to be really looking at the bigger context of what we're doing here? We have loads of data. We have more data than we know what to do with. It's having a major impact on how we behave, not just individually, but as teams, as society, globally. And we need to be thinking about the implications of that really carefully. When we're talking about smarter infrastructure, we're getting excited by the possibility of being able to monitor how infrastructure interacts with the people and with the resources that move through that infrastructure, and how we are actually serving the needs of our society. But that must surely raise ethics in our mind as well. If we are truly monitoring and we are truly controlling, to what extent are we doing that in the interest of society, and to what extent do we start to cross over into manipulation? So I want to also be exploring the decision-making process. Who is making those decisions? As we move forward and we're using smart devices and technologies, to what extent should it be us as humans who are taking responsibility for those decisions? To what extent are we happy that some of those decisions are automated? Can we learn from some of the mistakes we've made in the past? Are they relevant anymore? Some would say, no, let's toss the past where it belongs. We need to be always looking to the future. But I think in our hearts we know that that can't be true. And this is what I want to explore a little bit more as we go through the lecture today. And I certainly want to prick your conscience. If I haven't made you a little bit uncomfortable through the next hour, I will have failed. Because I think we need to move ourselves out of our comfort zones and really push ourselves to think more deeply about what we're doing. It's very easy to work day to day within our routines and not to consider the bigger picture. And I think this is the opportunity you have with the centre here to be able to really challenge at a policy level, but also across all of our disciplines and the interfaces that we should have across multiple disciplines and industries about what we should be creating for the next century, for the next 2 centuries, for our children, our grandchildren, and their descendants. So we have clearly major global challenges. And these challenges, these pointers are ones that were developed by the United Nations in 2015 when they were developing the Sustainable Development Goals. And they are really graphic. I think you've seen them, you'll recognise them. You'll also recognise that actually the statistics change depending on whether it's United Nations or World Economic Forum, and obviously very rapidly through the months and years. But if we're thinking that half of humanity actually lives within cities today, but you think actually about the number of people who are living in a deprived way in slums, are we satisfied with that? How are we going to respond to that? Rapid urbanization is absolutely putting pressure on resources, but we're also assuming that the high density of cities can bring about efficiency gains and technological innovation while reducing resource and energy consumption. So on those assumptions, we've got 18, I think, SDG goals, which are relevant for us today. One being the industry, the infrastructure and innovation, SDG Goal 9, and SDG 11 is the sustainable cities and communities. Now, what we really need to be doing is to bring these goals together, consider how those actually interplay, and are we actually delivering those successfully? So what I want to really start to consider now is the emerging future, what it is that we are creating. Because our current and our recent past infrastructure projects are our emerging future. But they're the future that we need to consider within the society and how we're moving today. So some of us will have had difficulties actually arriving in Cambridge today. Some of us will have had difficulties commuting into London today. Some of us will have had difficulties travelling through Europe because of the difficulty with air traffic control. All of these things need to be considered. And of course, we're dependent on things that were designed 100 years ago. We are more and more having fantastic projects like Crossrail, like Highspeed 2, like Heathrow, which are really connecting with the needs of us as people, as citizens. It's not that we're looking at them as just physical, technical projects in isolation. We're already getting that we need to consider both whole life but also integration across the whole of the infrastructure space. And that is a real sense of progress. This is a summary from the Foresight report of the Association of Geographic Information, which we produced in 2015, where we were recognising as a geographical discipline that actually there's a lot going on here now, that we need to be pulling the multidisciplines together around smart cities and Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, etc. But then thinking about that big data piece, that the column on the right, where those are coming from, how those can actually inform or misinform our assumptions and our conclusions of how actually the infrastructure components of a city come together. So we've got this wealth of data. We need to consider how to use it. And let's cast our minds back in Victorian times, which we seem to consider as being historic, not really relevant to us. But if you think about the cholera outbreaks in the mid-1800s and the response that occurred there, John Snow did some fantastic work in being able to research the distribution of the cholera outbreak and identifying that rather than it being the cause of miasma and of bad smells, which was the popular assumption, actually it was about polluted water and a particular pump. But the challenge he had was that people wouldn't listen to him. So people like Florence Nightingale, people who were really celebrated, were really determined that no, it was miasma, it was bad smells. That was why they then started to sprinkle detergent everywhere on the streets. So that caption on the right-hand side was a response of people on the streets around Soho who really did not like their houses being sprayed with detergent and being told that they smelt, etc., etc. What was unfortunate was that John Snow actually died and was never recognised in his lifetime for his breakthrough. And it actually took a force of change of the Great Stink of 1858 to force evacuation of the Houses of Parliament, for actually the shift to occur of the assumptions and challenges of the assumptions being made by some of our policymakers, not listening to some of our great thinkers, which actually led eventually to, of course, one of our ICE invisible superheroes, Bazalgette, being able to progress what we now know as the Victorian sewer systems, which absolutely transformed the quality of life for people in London. But what really stirred me was that it was only in 1902 that actually consolidation of London's water supplies occurred. Just at the turn of the century, we still had water supply who were drawing from the polluted waters of the river. Now, my grandmother was born at that time. It isn't so long ago. So when we start saying, oh, the Victorian sewers have served fantastically well, it is actually reachable within very close relations of ours. So when we start thinking about our own emerging futures, we really should be rethinking how we conceptualize time. And of course, what's happened now is that we have another ICE invisible superhero standing on the shoulders of one of our giants, our historical giants. Now, who, I wonder, in the room today will stand on the shoulders of Andy Mitchell? And of course, we've got Thames Tideway now, which is responding to the challenges of the Victorian system sewer now starting to fail and not being able to actually deliver to capacity. And of course, it's taken a long time for that to actually happen. You know, we've actually compromised, the Thames has suffered from that, and it's taken a long time to go through planning. So have we actually learned the lessons of the past? You know, our future potential, how much is it still limited by our prejudices, our inbuilt assumptions, our unconscious bias? Maybe our flawed opinions, our leadership who aren't brave enough to actually think in a different way. How can we improve that decision making and challenge a consensus of opinion so that we can make better progress? I would challenge that there's nothing different today to actually the way that people thought in the 19th century. I'd be happy for people to challenge me back, but we are humans. You know, how much have we actually changed? We have got the stock market crash occur. We have had Brexit. We've got the migration crisis, haven't we? And we've also got the climate change debate. Heathrow, how long has that taken to make that decision? Is it good enough? And then what has just happened with the Swansea Bay Lagoon project? How can we improve the way that we make decisions so that we can be more responsive in the way that we start to develop a more appropriate infrastructure? So let us consider how we should go around designing smart cities. I think many of you here already are fully aware of the fact that we need to be taking a multidisciplinary approach, a multifaceted approach. But what I want to explore a bit more is how actually engineering needs to interface with digital technology and with social science. So the aim around smart cities is very often cited to be around decoupling the growth of urbanization and of population growth from climate change. So climate change, the big enemy for humanity and the earth. So we'll do anything we can to actually stop climate change. Urbanization is happening. So what we're going to do is we're going to do everything we can to facilitate urbanization. I'll come back to that assumption a little bit later. But let's continue with this. The assumption is that we get more for less using data, using automation and control. We need more mobility and energy from less infrastructure and from the existing infrastructure. Let's not assume it needs to be the new infrastructure. We need more housing from less space, more construction from less time and for less cost, more productivity from less resources. And in the standard space, at an international level, we're trying to figure out how we can improve standards to support a multifaceted approach. So rather than it be the BIM silo and the smart cities silo, as essentially the standards organisations are set up at the moment, how can we change that? Really important that we do. Really important that we start to develop a common language across all of those standards. And the call for integration is a challenging one. It's really stimulating as well. So, whether it be autonomous transportation systems, whether it be the location-based mobile apps that we probably all take for granted now. And do we question, actually, how that's delivered to us, what it's delivering, what decisions it is making on our behalf? So the quality of data and how it's integrated is really massively important to us. So we've got this wonderful concept, haven't we, of it's almost like a model. Some of you, the railway models that you might have had as a kid, and you've got complete control over it. As you well know, we have got teenagers who can take over the traffic controls in cities and cause massive disruption. So again, we need to be thinking about how to make this safe and secure. But currently, the engineering community is absolutely pointing at digital technologies. It is the new thing, it is the buzz, and that the smart city can be the ultimate deliverer of efficiency and resilience, so we have the perfect world for us. But are we actually fully acknowledging the intricate socio-political context in which it is situated? And this is Ellie Cosgrave, who is another invisible superhero at ICE, the urban angel. And Ellie has, I have to say, written a fantastic paper, December 2017, which I would point you to. She's really issued some fantastic challenges for us. And ICE has also done some work, and there was a workshop earlier this year to really start investigating this. Because the difficulty we've got is that, beautiful though that vision may be of a fully controlled, sleek city, actually our cities aren't like that. They aren't well-oiled, and they actually thrive by being messy. This is talking about people here. They don't want to be controlled, and it is uncertain. So, how on earth does an engineer design for that? If we were going to actually say, okay, we're going to redesign the Oxford Circus junction, as Atkins did about 5 years ago now, I think, how much did we look at it purely from an engineering design perspective, and how much did we need to look at it from a behavioural perspective? And this, I think, is one of the things we really need to be looking at, but that was a team which was multidisciplinary. It did have sociologists involved. It did have people who really understood pedestrian movements. So Ellie poses these challenges for the engineering community, and I have to say I've adapted to them, certainly the last couple as well, is that we really do need to engage in critical debate that incorporates and values us and our experiences and how we as individuals operate and mentally need to be kept well. And if you think of the difficulties we've got at the moment of mental health, now one could say, well, that's emerged because people didn't acknowledge that 100 years and 200 years ago. Fact is, we do know about it now, and we should be designing our infrastructure where we live and where we work to accommodate that. And this absolutely will be something that the university itself is extremely concerned about right now. So let's challenge our modes of thinking as well. So just as I was talking then about John Snow's work, is let's challenge the way that we historically have understood how things work and look at it from different perspectives. So this is about diversity of thinking. Diversity is not just about you and me, men, women, different race. It's also respecting the ways we think differently as well. Slow and fast. How can we stimulate the right sort of thinking so we get that diversity and we don't go into groupthink? And think about smart technologies as well, not just about delivering what already is. So the classic one is the robot, which is now building brick walls. Is that really how we want to engage with robots, or do we want actually to be thinking about technologies which do things differently? So different materials, responsive materials, which I think Jennifer is particularly interested in, and manufacturing off-site, that could be done by robotics. So now, let's not use artificial intelligence and robots for what we can already do. It's about how we can transform and make smart cities, assuming that that is what we want, smart cities, a better place to live and to work. And that's really what I want to be challenging, is let's remember that when we're creating urban infrastructure systems, they need to serve all urban dwellers, but they also need to be serving all geographies. And if we're really thinking that we need more space, perhaps one of the things we should be looking at is not just sci-fi, is it? It is, well, could we be living underwater? Could we be living in deserts? Could robots actually be helping to disperse resources in a way which we'd never conceived of before, and therefore make small land habitable than we would have assumed before? So I would say let's be careful that one size does not fit all. So let's challenge the assumptions on how a city functions and is operated, and really reflect hard on how technology should be changing its role and its potential. Think about how ICT could transform the way we live. It already is, but have we actually thought about it and controlled it, or has it been done to us by Facebook, by Google? Should we, as engineers, as people who are looking to plan and develop and maintain the smart infrastructure, also be thinking about that side of things too? And what's interesting is that maybe some of the challenges at the moment is that we've only done half a job on this thing called BIM. Because actually BIM is not just about the design side of infrastructure and buildings. It should be about whole life. But it's only going to do that if we start actually overlapping the space of smart cities with BIM and having a better quality conversation. But let's just explore this a little bit more. So we're saying disruptive technology is disruptive, and it does change the face of industries. So if we think, if we do go back into history, think about how agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution completely transformed our societies and economies. And we're saying, well, this is happening again, and actually this is happening in a bigger way than it has ever done before. And bear with me a little bit, but what went through my mind this morning is, if we're saying that this is the biggest revolution that we've had as human beings ever, if you asked a Neanderthal that, I think he'd probably say it was worse for him because he is now extinct. So just think about the different perspectives we've got. Is that we are making quite a drama of what's happening. Back in the Neanderthal days, climate was changing. It was an ice age. And I'm not saying that what's happening now is not human-induced. Absolutely not. But let's keep in perspective how we as humans have evolved. We have evolved from those times. We are evolving now. So let's be responsible and continue to do so. And again, thinking about that we're now in an age of disruptive data and how people are becoming quite fearful of digital data. But if you go back into Elizabethan times, Luther, actually in Protestant propaganda, if you like, that was being manipulated through the press. And again, people were really fearful. And that happened again in Egyptian times when we started to write. People were really worried that we were going to be manipulating people. And I think, and corrupting the human mind. So it has happened before. This worry that expertise is going to suddenly become democratized and we will lose control of our knowledge. And that feels very threatening to us. So again, let's learn from some of the things that have occurred in the past, is that at the best, we are looking at democratization of information and knowledge throughout the world. At the worst, we are absolutely looking at manipulation and distortion. So how should we manage that? We do have to be able to equip people to work through, understand and tailor themselves to a new world, but again, making it accessible to all, not just to the few. So what does that mean in practice? Well, I hope that this last year has made every single one of us uncomfortable, because if there was one thing that should wake us up, if it hadn't already, was Grenfell. And I don't want to dramatise or exploit it, because it was an awful thing to occur. But with the Hackett report having come out quite recently, what she's actually identifying is a wake-up call to our industry. We really do need to grapple with this, because I'm quite sure that we, at the Institution of Civil Engineers, for instance, would appreciate that this is not just about the high-rise buildings, the high-risk buildings. This could happen to our infrastructure. And in Chapter 8, I was talking to Jennifer a couple of weeks ago. It is actually gold dust for us, because she is identifying the fundamental need for us to be able to look after the golden thread of building information. And I would say infrastructure information as well. It's far too haphazard how data is created, put into documents and forgotten about, or recreated, or ignored. And actually this was what the BIM movement was first set up for. And maybe we've kind of lost sense of that by going into the detail, and if I dare say it, being quite anal about what BIM Level 2 is and following the standards and forgetting the point of it. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, fantastic, I'm a BIM expert. No, I'm far, far more interested about what it can accomplish. So as a geographer, I am passionate about being able to integrate data in a way that it can help us make better decisions and create a better world. And that may sound very esoteric, very visionary, but I think it's really important that we remember what is truly motivating us. So the BIM movement absolutely should be able to help us digitally transform and allow us to understand how we can actually move from analog to digital. So what's wrong with sticking it in the post or putting it into a file and putting it into the basement so it can't actually be used by the guys who are maintaining and considering how to use insulation materials? How can we now start to demonstrate use of semi-automated and automated processes which can be scalable, which isn't just for a particular discipline, it isn't just for a particular building, but can truly be right the way across infrastructure? And the challenge for me then is how we develop open shareable standards which allow for checking, allow for repeatable, and allow for improvable processes. All of those would have been really important to help avoid Grenfell. But a lot of it, of course, is about behaviours as well. So I think as engineers, we really need to be thinking about where behaviours need to change and be challenged. So very quickly, I would like to just introduce you to the UK BIM Alliance. This is about supporting the whole of industry, right down to the grassroots, in understanding how we can use digital data to help transform our industry and develop and to deliver more successful projects. But BIM is about the information, and ultimately it's about that digital data and liberating it from the documents. Because actually when we've gone through the government programme for BIM, this is from the Environment Agency, the initial analysis we did was that about 20% was data that could be used, and 80% was tied up in documents or in proprietary formats. And when you looked at that again, actually the vast majority of it again was ASCII. So how you were actually going to be able to use that across the whole life and for different users. It's just not good enough. And there has been vast improvements with Environment Agency and with the government departments. But they still need help. They still need help from Building Smart and Open Geospatial Consortium, etc., to be really able to nail this and to challenge vendors to start adopting those open standards rather than actually tying us into proprietary software. And this is, I think, one of the key diagrams in the ISO that should be being published in November to replace our BIM Level 2 documents. And it absolutely puts information management within asset management, within organisational management, and I would argue actually within the strategy and policies for countries and regions as well. It's important that we understand what that data is supposed to be serving and ensure that it is available right the way through the whole life cycle and for all of the stakeholders. And we're quite away from being able to achieve that still. So the International BIM Standardization, we have got a British Standards Institution here, which works really hard, interfaces with CEN and CENILUX in Europe, and then with ISO. And one of the most entertaining things that I probably have done was to give a presentation to CEN, to our European colleagues, the day before Brexit, or the Brexit vote, to convince them that we should actually sign a Vienna Agreement and work together to produce this ISO. And we got a successful vote. And then the day after, we Brexited. My inbox got filled with jokes and teasing from my European colleagues. They have not forgotten that, but actually it's quite elevating because we formed some great relationships from that too. So humour is important, isn't it? So this is a diagram which I should, and forgive me because the logos have gone, but this has been produced by the Centre of Digital Built Britain, along with BSI and with the UK BIM Alliance, to really be able to explain to everyone why we're moving from BIM Level 2 and 1192 documents to ISO. Because what we're wanting to achieve is what I'm arguing for here, is that common language and approach right the way across the globe. Our industries, our companies, a lot of them are global. It causes us huge problems when there's a clash in language and approach, and it certainly causes problems when we have that within our own infrastructure. So this is a landscape of what we're working hard on at the moment. As I say, the ISO documents which will replace the core 1192 documents should be coming out in November, and we're working hard now on the guidance to help everyone in making that transition. Essentially, the principles are the same, so the message is do not panic. In fact, what I think is the opportunity here is that we have had a rash of different guidance, of different training, of different approaches to BIM Level 2 in 1192. If we hold everyone to account, and this is why I'm so excited to be working with CDBB and BSI in the UK BIM Alliance, if we say no, there can only be one guidance framework, please, and then each of the institutions and the universities and so forth work from that framework and just develop what they need for their particular audience, that's fine. But please, let's not have the rash of guidance and training that has developed so far with 1192. So why is it important to have that common language? I think one of the great examples that the Open Geospatial Consortium comes up with was the fires in Boston. And forgive me, I can't remember, it was in the 19th century, I can't remember the exact date, but they needed lots of fire vendors coming from different parts of the states. And they arrived, and then what they found was that the valves were different. The valves were different to the pipes that the vendors had. And that was why Boston actually suffered so hard, was that the standards actually varied across those local states. And that is a really great example, I think, of that, we have already got with our technologies. And yesterday, I had a real problem because instead of using Skype, somebody wanted to use GoToMeeting, or somebody wanted to use a different. How many of you in the room, just to wake you up, have had problems when you've actually been using webinar technologies? There you go. So, yeah, we're the same scenario, isn't it, as the fire vendors, is that we've developed different standards, different approach, and it's making it really hard and painful for us. Yet that is not going to win over people to digital technologies, is it? Seriously not helping. So without a common language, Ian Bush and Tim Wood were challenging in 2013, but actually our motives and ideas and information about the built environment just simply will not fit together. Our understanding will be limited, and much of our downstream effort is subsequently focused on attempting to retrofit information with widely differing meanings or trying to deduce meaning from data. And actually some of that is what is coming out of the Hackett report as well. We've known about this for so long, but we're not doing enough about it. We all want to do it our own way. This is absolutely what's happened with BIM. So creating that language, what does it look like? Well, this is one from Tim Wood, and it's essentially, if you look at the top there, business model, that is that organisational management that we're using to hold the BIM process, the information management process to account. But also, we then need to be thinking about the semantics around assets as well, and the logical models, and how we do the quality and the logical exchange. So, really key stuff here. And these are all the initiatives and standard examples. British Standards Institution apparently are controlling something like 2,000 standards. Goodness knows how many there are within ISO. And I'm the convener for the ISO strategy roadmap for construction environment, and Jennifer Schooling is helping me on that as well. And we need to map out what that is. It is exhausting and overwhelming thinking how on earth we get our arms around this. But we need to do it. Because at the moment we're here, we're down in the weeds. that's going to make it really, really hard for us to make progress. And unfortunately, this tends to be the reaction, is trying to get people to engage with boring, unsexy standards is really hard. It's actually, I can't be bothered. I'll just carry on the way I always have done it. So, there's some great things happening. So open data, again, that democratization of data. Some fabulous stuff happened in the UK. We've got the Geospatial Commission being set up at the moment, certainly in Europe as well. And we've got the Inspire, for instance, the EU Inspire, which tries to bring data together, but making things open. The UK has been phenomenal, actually, in the way that we can use data. Trying to do an environmental assessment in the States, when I first started doing environmental consultancy back in the early 90s, is a nightmare because you can't get hold of the data. In the UK you can, and actually Ordnance Survey has been superb in actually helping to actually make data which is transferable. But then that challenge of making it open and free has also been a challenge, because we need to be thinking about how to make it secure. We need to be thinking about who it is appropriate to allow to use that data. But the key is to make it open in the way that it is open potentially to be shared in the way that we've got the standards supporting them. And Berlin is a really great example of how they're actually freeing up that data for citizens and being able to analyse how that happens. Now, one of the challenges I've had is that going to Building Smart International and saying, if we could press the reset button, what would our standards now look like? Would it be IFC or would it be something different? I have to say I was nearly lynched when I first brought that up, but some of the people who were really angry with me at the time have actually become some of my best friends. So, again, it's about this collaboration. It's taking a risk, having a good damn argument, but then being able to go and have a drink at the pub after. It's that sort of thing that I think we need to really be able to foster in our way that we work. So OGC and Building Smart are now collaborating on, it's IDBE, trips off the tongue, Integrated Digital Built Environment Working Group, where we're really looking at challenging use cases of what standards should be being developed to enable a freeing up of data, whether it be smart city, whether it be BIM, whether it be geospatial, whether it be environmental. So it's really exciting stuff, but of course we need to move fast. What we need is more people, more brain power, more youngsters coming into this, because a lot of the people around the standards group are heading for retirement. With the greatest of respect, they are mostly male. I'm very often 1 in 200 people. And we're most of us middle class as well. And that isn't good enough. We really do need to get more people interested and engaged. What I do think is really encouraging is that across the world, and this is from Norway actually, there's a recognition actually of being able to pull all of this together. So here, we're already seeing that actually on the right-hand side, there's smart cities and smart society. And if you look at the top, it's starting to, UK level 2, level 3. I think the mistake that we've made is that you can only go up to level 2 and no further. Although I understand the principle of that, is that we are trying to educate and get people up the curve, particularly lower down the tiers. At the same time, that was quite insulting to me, because as a geographer and as geospatial, I'm already doing that stuff. So don't tell me I can't because that's in BIM level 3. And don't tell people who are doing smart cities, oh, sorry, you can't do that because that's BIM level 3. That's an utter nonsense. So, we are looking at that again. Again, that move to ISO is giving us the opportunity, and certainly with CDBB, to rethink that. And the dialogue is happening at an international level too. So let's get back into the here and now, and does this all make a difference? So I think what's really interesting here is that in Atkins we've been looking at how can we actually do a workflow and then potentially automate the ISO stuff, the BIM stuff. And that would actually free us up to concentrate on what we as human beings are best at. But I don't want Atkins to do that in isolation. Actually, within the UK BIM Alliance, I'm seeing a lot of other companies looking at doing the same thing as well. And I think what would be really exciting is if we can have a convergence of process across the whole life cycle, actually. But we can also have that with standards. We can challenge the vendors to also do the same thing. But we could also do it from a training and from a certification point of view. One single point of truth. One version, please. Not, oh, well, I want to do it my own way. So planning the job, all of those different things supported by standards, methods and procedures. But let's just scale that up now. So, you know, with Atkins, we're sort of playing with the idea of the My Digital Airport. But, you know, Heathrow's already there. Gatwick's already looking at it, so that the airports actually got together at Gatwick. They're collaborating at the moment, and they're all thinking this way. So, for instance, Istanbul Airport's a really good example. You know, how could we make that consistent and make sure that the workflows and data are consistent? But I've got myself rather excited and carried away there. I went into engineering speak, didn't I? Because what about that messy bit versus the controlled order, the social dilemma? So we have got a clash in the notion of the city. You know, absolutely, we've got a complex and we've got a wicked problem tied up with socio-technical systems. You know, and the difficulty we have, really only written by the Hackett report, is the engineering design is based on reductionist mode of thinking, but there's a reason for that, because we need to be clear in our design specifications, we need to be legally accountable, and we need to be regulated and safe. We need to have that quality. So there is a real dichotomy existing here. I think what we've got to do is we've got to get the right communities of experts together and standing in each other's shoes, understanding each other's perspectives and why we behave or are insistent on taking a particular approach. But I think the other thing we're realising now as well is that if we only improve capacity and efficiency rather than looking at radically challenging usage norms, actually all we do is we compound the problem of resource overuse. So the traffic jams that I've just experienced with my husband coming up here, you know, is a classic one. Dartford Tunnel was designed to have a life of goodness knows what, but it's hit problems pretty quickly as far as I'm concerned. That's within my lifetime. And the crossing is the same. So, you know, what we're having to actually adapt to is that good enough? Should we be looking more at how to change behaviours and the way that we move through our world? And let's challenge the downside of urbanisation and digitalisation as well. That's social and psychological impact, because there is no doubt that actually what we're introducing could actually enhance actual social inequality rather than address it. So again, we must be looking at this in a very conscious way. So ICE in 2018, and fantastic, to drive truly inclusive design, break from traditional approaches and not repeat what already has been done. A total shift in the paradigm on how cities are designed and managed is needed. So how do we individually respond to that, individually as teams and as organisations? So it is possible. I really do believe that digital technologies offer an opportunity here, but we do need to think about how to make it inclusive. And one of the inspirations I have is Professor Tim Unwin, who was actually my tutor back when I was an undergraduate in London. He's now a professor chair for UNESCO for ICT 4D. And 4D, by the way, is not about BIM, it's about for development. So really thinking about how can we actually make ICT available for everyone around the world in all the impoverished countries. Yeah, and again, thinking about when our assumptions get hidden in our design criteria. So optimal mode of transport for Citymapper or Google Maps. Who was that designed for? Was it for the engineer sat behind the desk and the computer who was able-bodied, fit, etc.? Or was it a woman with children with a pushchair? these sorts of things need to be taken into consideration. And it is about both physical and digital choice. Again, going back into the past, Netherley Estate in Liverpool, that was built with the best of intentions in response to a shortage of cheap housing and of quality housing. So government was subsidising, and there was a great rash of concrete buildings built there. Now, Netherley was poorly planned as well, so it didn't have transport, it didn't have employment, and within 10 years of it being built, people were being moved back out, and it was demolished at a very expensive cost. So, back in the day, that was very controversial. It was already being challenged, but the policy was just going steadfastly through and not thinking about the social side. So those people moved into quality homes, but sacrificed the communities that they really felt identified with. Coed Darcy, on the other hand, inspired by the Prince and by Poundbury, this is being built on old contaminated land, a really inspirational project. But the clue of where I want to go next is what's said, urban village. Smart city, urban village. So, let's just carry on for the moment, just thinking about the social side of things before I move on to that. So, we have got some great projects. So we've got a city within Jeddah, which is looking at wellness, and it has to, all of the factors have to fulfill that wellness criteria to go forward. Dubai has now got a happiness index. Bhutan, actually, in the Himalayas, actually, as a country, has a happiness index. So I think, there are nuggets there which give us clues to go forward. And I can't help but include that tidal lagoon and the decisions that were made a day or so ago is, what was the basis for that? Was the data that was presented the right data? Did it give the right context? Did it give that actually this was going to have a very extended life compared to wind turbines? Did it give the fact that actually it could be quite revolutionary in being able to demonstrate where we could go as an industry next? I don't know. I'd just like to explore actually what the context of those decisions were and how we could help perhaps to improve those decisions going forward. Who is it who's taking a step back and looking at a much wider consideration? So, one of the things I think is great within Atkins is we've got a Caroline Paradise who works on well briefing. It's now been rechristened human-centered design, where they're really looking not only at the physiological but also at the psychological needs of the people who will be being served by the infrastructure or the building. And that is then brought within the design, but then is held to account actually in delivery and then in the maintenance side of things. And this is being used in a number of different projects, but again, I think could be extended in its application. But let's take that bigger picture and taking a step back. Because what I want to do is to challenge the presumption that actually urbanisation is inevitable. So we've said climate change, we need to design against that, it's bad. Yet we seem to be assuming that urbanisation is it good and that we need to design for it. Surely isn't there the opportunity for technology to actually allow for a more distributed way of living? Maybe we would be able to distribute resources better, but how do we actually function as human beings? Is it really better to be in crowded cities? Can we design cities better? Or should we be thinking about those urban villages that perhaps Prince Charles is thinking of? And let's see whether we can actually unleash the prisoners of geography from climate, etc. So remembering again that one size does not fit all. Are we simply matching supply with demand? So we're saying, mass migration into cities. Oh, so, okay, so we will now design for that demand, rather than thinking about how could we change the behaviour. So what is driving people to go into cities? You know, what was it that drove Dick Whittington into London? It was it was the streets of gold, wasn't it? You know, what are the illusions that people have that actually we could be thinking about? You know, when we've got these digital technologies and ability to actually communicate across the world, how could we actually start to inform people and change people's behaviours? So, you know, are we thinking of a diversity of need? And this is a very personal view from my point of view, is that I'd be horrified to live in a city. So, you know, I also need, when I'm talking about this, to challenge my own assumptions. Maybe it is the right thing, but what I would like is a debate on it. You know, are we actually challenging ourselves appropriately? Your smaller societies equivalent to villages, there is evidence that that is better for us psychologically. When we've got these problems with mental health, are we actually thinking this in the right way? You know, what is a source of wisdom and compassion and joy? You know, consider children and forest schools, or therapy with animals and pets. You know, cityscapes, social deserts. We've all got those pictures of dystopia as against utopia, haven't we? And just imagine David Attenborough here doing a voiceover here. So, you know, here they come in their millions, awe-inspiring spectacle. And behind them, where once the teeming masses squabbled over every square inch, an almost eerie silence reigns. By air, by land, by sea, it is, on our planet, the unparalleled migration. This, he would conclude with that slow whisper of significance, is half term. What drives us to evacuate our cities and go into the country? What drives us to do that daily commute because we actually want to live in the country? Let's really think about, you know, what our fundamental principles are when we're talking about this. And also, what really worries me is we don't seem to talk about the hinterland very much. What is going to happen between the cities? You know, how are we going to produce food? How are we going to care for that part of the world? So critical decision making. So, you know, this is something that I think we need to take responsibility of, each of us as individuals, because teams and organisations and governments are made of individuals. So we can't shirk our responsibility. Do we want to be a player or victim, or do we simply want to follow? Is it safety in numbers? You know, there should be the wisdom of crowds, but we also know the risk of groupthink and the need for diversity of thinking. So how can we make sure that we're seeing that bigger picture and that we allow our consciences to actually drive some better informed judgments? You know, to what extent we should be allowing some of the decisions to be made by computers and robots. I'm really curious about how we could deliver data to nudge our consciences and nudge better quality thinking, which actually is unique to us as humans rather than robots. But could we use gaming technology to do that actually? So to actually stop willful blindness, as Margaret Heffernan discussed, to be able to tackle mind change, which Susan Greenfield is really concerned about as happening here, to be able to stimulate both fast and slow thinking. How often have you gone out of a meeting, slept on it and thought, damn, I should have said that in that meeting? So, you know, I think some of the answers could be from health and safety training. I remember my husband Martin did some health and safety training. I think it was at Crossrail. I'm looking at him for it, but it was Tideway. Beg your pardon. So it was Tideway, and you know, that was coaching and actors who were really pushing you out of your comfort zone and probably challenging your conscience as well. And the learning that came out of that, I think, was incredible. Now, I think we could be doing this sort of thing with wider decision making too. So training for the future, we really need to be thinking about critical thinking. How can we train our students actually to be more challenging, to actually, you know, not go into that groupthink mode and really take a responsibility and excitement about those global urban challenges? Being multidisciplinary in approach, thinking about volunteer networks, so the Engineers Without Borders UK, Map Action, who put people into very challenging situations, have to be responsive, understand people's different viewpoints. You know, people who are refugees or who are suffering from disasters. And of course there's Class of Your Own, who's actually doing similar sorts of things in schools as well. Some of the principles of being able to integrate data refer to all of the things that I've mentioned here. And this was a slide that I produced about 5 years ago, which actually, if you thought each of those could be a button in a gaming technology, and you work through it. So that's sort of something I'm playing around with at the moment. But, you know, this, I think, takes us back to, you know, fundamentals again, and the Grenville is, when I did my MSc in coaching and behavioural change about 4 years ago, I was looking at collaboration, and one of the things that really shocked me was the reluctance to be honest and speak up when things aren't right. So, you know, some of the comments I'll let you read, but, you know, to say that, you know, people were reluctant to name it would rather, you know, rather than stating it early, they'd leave it till the end because they were scared to put the neck out, you know, to expose themselves. So I think that's something we need to challenge. And, you know, these are the sorts of things that I think, you know, not just for our children, but as industry as well. How we need to behave and respond in a digital world is really important. Our digital identity and security, but how we can develop relationships in a virtual way as well. And one of the things that I think is really important, therefore, is to reflect what we need to bring into a collaborative relationship, whether it's virtual or whether it's physical, whether I'm talking to you in the room, whether I'm facilitating an ISO meeting. These are the sorts of attributes I would like to see of each of us, respecting each other, being able to have that conflict, but bringing soul into this as well, and graciousness. I'll let you read that and reflect on that. So finally, I couldn't help but bring in the them or us, because I think it is a fascinating one, is that, you know, I talked about the Neanderthals, and I do love that graphic of how we're turning back into something physically quite similar. But, you know, American citizens are now spending a phenomenal amount of time, actually I think we are in the UK as well. Maybe this is very Western side of things and something that the less developed countries can learn from us. Don't make the same mistakes. But, you know, our minds are evolving. You know, if I was saying earlier, we tend to forget that, you know, we are still evolving, we're still adapting, and our brains are absolutely adapting to being interrupted by our phones. I am addicted to my phone. It's the first and the last thing I look at. I'm ashamed to say it. And my daughters will say to me every so often, "Mum, you're not present. I'm in the machine." And I know that I do that. And it's really hard to break that habit. And I think, you know, if I asked each of you, if you looked into your heart, are you in the same situation? Hands up. So, you know, how does that impact us actually as humans in our relationships as well? You know, the next generation of computers, this is what Mervyn Minsky was saying back in the 80s, they'll be lucky if they want to keep us as pets. You know, it's no longer laughable because it is happening around us. You know, computers are now beating us in very elaborate games. I love the one about abominable or a bomb in a bull. You know, actually, they are doing it in a different way, but they can compete with us really, really in a scary way. But the lesson should be clear, is that they are doing it in a different way. So, you know, I also rather like this graphic as well. You know, that doesn't need to be, you know, we don't need to design robots who replace us. You know, why are we allowing for that? What are the things that robots could do which we can't? What could robots do which could make our planet more habitable and more and for us to live in a more sustainable way? So could we be thinking about this in a different way? You know, Susskind and Susskind in their Future of the Professions, they were really quite bleak. they honestly did feel that a lot of our traditional professions would go to and be replaced by less expert people who were essentially cranking the wheel of the high-performing systems. But you know what, I would challenge that, because I think, you know, we have got a choice. You know, I don't think that any of you really would like that. Father's Day wasn't so far away. You know, we have got a number of capabilities, the cognitive, the affective, the manual, the moral. You know, which of those are we happy to hand over to the robots? You know, actually there are things, you know, could we have a better lifestyle if more was automated and we just had to focus on the stuff that we're smart at? You know, let's not lose our common sense because there's too much information. Let them do the hard work and give us the data that we really need to stimulate the right thinking and look at those adaptive challenges. And that's right the way across the board, whether it be at the operations and maintenance level or whether it be the leadership, whether it be government, etc. How can we deliver data which is trustworthy and safe, but is stimulating as well? You know, you are doing remarkably well. I haven't actually used this yet, but you know, probably after 10 slides, you were going into a trance, and you probably, maybe, some of you weren't as challenging what I was saying as perhaps you should have been. And I'm really sorry, that's the risk of PowerPoint. But you know, if we could really liven stuff up, and actually I delivered this in a more gaming technology groovy type of way. Yeah, I'm being a bit facetious now, but we have got, you know, the really interesting thing now is that, you know, we have got different parts of our brain which we can stimulate in different ways, and we're very, very visual. We have to be careful that we're not manipulating, but there is the opportunity, if we understand the psychology and the way that our brains work, to be able to really harvest better thinking. So whether it be the neuro-linguistic programming side of things, but actually the neuroscience, there's some real opportunities there, but we need to start working across disciplines. So, you know, I do wonder whether that isn't what we're asking, either of us as humans and data scientists, but also as the computers and the robots, is, you know, how we deliver data to, you know, deliver that crucial subset of information which supports the right people making the right decisions, you know, in the right way. It is a real responsibility. It's a challenge which I don't think that we've yet considered. And certainly not to design out the unintended consequences of how our brains are adapting. We are undoubtedly developing and living in a complex parallel virtual world which we can probably control even less perhaps than the physical world, which is quite scary really, isn't it? Whether that be the way that we move around the world or how we actually develop our relationships. So summing up, you know, I would say to you, it's been quite a long lecture this, so I hope you've hung on to my apron strings. But you know, if we go back to the beginning and the United Nations challenges there, the key issues, what are the questions I'd like you to be kept awake with? Well, first, I wouldn't want to keep you awake, so please don't worry about it. But you know, if we could recast some of those responses, so you know, rather than assuming that urbanization is what we would design for, is actually how could we change behaviours so that actually people would live in a distributed way? How we could use technologies to do that. You know, I had a daughter who was in Australia. I probably was in touch with her better via WhatsApp than when she returned home and was living under the same roof. You know, the one I certainly want to take away is the limiting factor of digital transformation. Actually, if it's the people, is that actually an advantage? That we don't want to be necessarily a part of the digital transformation system, is that we want to be able to keep apart from it and to be able to judge it in a dispassionate way. So the lecture has explored some of the challenges and opportunities. I'm really sorry I haven't been able to cover them all. And I hope, you know, it's delved a little into how our consciences might help to guide the way forward, but it has only gone so far. I would argue that we need to give this much greater consideration and debate. And I think perhaps a key to this is a greater sense of our own mortality, our vulnerability, and sense of wanting to make a difference for the better. You know, I'm a mum. I've just become a grandmother. You know, it's given a real sense of, you know, what our mortality is, what our history is, what our future is. How can we challenge that? You know, mindfulness for engineers. I thought I'd just let you know how I was inspired with the lecture. These are some of the books, as well as obviously the technical stuff I do, and a little bit of a hint of a rediscovered hobby of mine, which has helped to keep me grounded and motivated. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. I've taken up more than enough of your time, and safe journeys home and a fantastic career and future ahead for you all.
Well, Anne, thank you so much. Very, very stimulating lecture. Anne, she's got so much energy. She is willing to answer some questions. So we have a little time for. I hope you've all had an awful lot of new thoughts put into your heads. So, who would like to ask a question? Anne, I'm sure you'll be able to deal with those. John.
I'm fascinated by this socio-technical interface. But one thing you didn't mention very much, which I have felt has dominated a lot of decision-taking, are economic models.
Yes.
For example, I first came up against this on the design of the Jubilee Line extension, where impacts of new stations on existing communities, that sort of thing, was dominated by this idea that land value uplift just swamped everything else.
Yes.
And it just totally, I felt, neglected real human impact. And I just wondered if you could weave in a little bit of your thinking, the impacts of economic models on some of our perverted decision-taking.
I would.
I think
Yes.
Swansea Bay may well be an example.
Yes, I would agree with that. I have to say I kind of deliberately, because I thought I was covering too much already. It's a really good challenge to make. I do think that's absolutely right. And I think that's the problems that we've had with Highspeed too, is that there hasn't been an adequate consideration of the economics and the balance of north-south and you know the northern powerhouse. Again, I would say the same thing is that, you know, who is it who's actually taking a far enough step back and considering the economics overall? And ironically, we live next door to the economist for the Foreign Office, so we have some quite interesting debates actually. And you know, it's not just in the UK either, is it? It's globally too. You know, I think the example I had of Netherley. Actually, that was, again, it was driven by poor economic decisions. So, yes, you're quite right, and I apologise for not mentioning it, but I think there's, you know, socio-technical, the economic are all really, really important. We need to have all of those people in the debate. No one is more important than the other. They all need to be present.
So where do I throw this now?
To the next person.
Oh, yes, look. Yes.
I'm going to pick up the same sort of area, but the interesting thing about data and the way...
Jenny, do you want to introduce yourself?
By all means. So I'm Jenny Cook, alumnus of QEd, and I work for Network Rail. I also chair the Rail Engineers Forum, which is great fun. So I'm really interested in the way that we've got an awful lot of commercialisation of data. So our GDPR briefing that I had to give to all my staff recently was about Google and Facebook and how basically they can take your data and make money from it. Yeah. And if we're trying to achieve an outcome that's genuinely beneficial to society, why are companies the ones making all the money from it?
It's a great question. So there was a slide I took out. I wish I hadn't now. That there is the opportunity to be able to actually make sure that data, we actually realise the value of it. And so that us, the owners of that as individuals, we would get paid for the use of that. And it couldn't be exploited by one company. So blockchain would be a part of it. So there is work being done to how you actually manage the data and the process and the app that's being developed and the learning that's being developed from that in a way that actually it can't be monopolized by Google and Facebook. It is a real problem at the moment. It absolutely goes to the heart of how we can move forward. So again, a really great observation. Thank you.
Who's next?
Hi, Kristen McCaskill. I run a master's program in the Department of Engineering here. I was just interested in your comment around choosing, being more proactive and actually thinking about the development of technology. And you made a reference to robotics and bricklaying. And I just wondered if you could explore a little bit more your comment about that, because you're implying that we're perhaps not looking at robotics in a way that could be most effective for the development of cities, and that it's replacing jobs that perhaps shouldn't be replaced. So I was just interested in hearing more of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, and I think it's both a societal, but it's an economic one as well. Is the impact. So if we did it, essentially like an environmental assessment, actually, and I don't think we're doing it like that at the moment. Is that if we could say, right, okay, if we substituted robots for this particular activity, what is the knock-on effect? Is that going to be good for society? Is it going to be for our economics? Is it going to be good for the way that we deliver infrastructure? Then that would be fine. But we're not looking at it from that perspective at the moment. So, again, there's some really big questions that I'm raising here around, for instance, urbanization. Actually, how could robotics be able to enable us to change behaviours, be able to do the heavy lifting of the data analysis and so forth, but then allow us to bring our human minds and consciences into the final decision. So it is challenging ourselves more about where are we prepared to let this go. Because I think it comes back to the question you've just raised, actually, is that who made a decision that Google and Uber and Facebook could do that? Or did it just kind of happen? I'm fearful that the same thing's going to happen with robotics and artificial intelligence, is that we should be making a much more deliberate, conscious decision about how far we want this to go and how we want to exploit the robots.
So it's more so individual companies picking off what technology to develop, and there's no one giving a high-level thought leadership or overview. I'm just interested when you say we, who is it? Is that government, or is that as an industry we come together industries?
What a great question again. That's a very lazy way for me to use we, is that we do need to say who needs to be responsible and accountable for this. Or how can we influence this? We, as an institution of the civil engineers, or as Cambridge, as universities, or as in our own companies, the UK BIM Alliance. There's various ways that we could influence, but it's who's going to start it. Does it need a John Snow, or actually could we do this collectively? This is where, I think, sort of the conversations which have started with BSI and CDBB and the UK BIM Alliance, for instance, and others, is really important. And the way that actually there's more debate about how the institutions come together and mobilise, the digital transformation working groups, etc. I think, this is what we need to do more of. But are we then being daring enough in the questions that those organisations could actually be able to pose? And I say that with the greatest respect for people who are in the room right at this moment.
Well, one more question, and I think we must wrap up.
I have a loud enough voice, so I probably don't need this.
It looks like pass the parcel. I'm waiting for you to unwrap something.
Peter Hewitt from Laing O'Rourke. From a practical point of view, I wondered whether or not the data storage technologies that we have been using have actually been running ahead of us. and that is something that is stopping us from looking backwards to learn from our past history. In that my garage is filled full of technology that I can no longer use because it has become redundant, and the information that I have stored on that technology is now also no longer available. And that means that you're constantly living in the present rather than being able to look back, in terms of being able to gather that information and learn from what has gone on before.
Yeah, and that, of course, is what we're trying to achieve with the open data standards, is that actually the formats to use actually are independent of the technologies themselves, but that's easier to say than to actually do. That's certainly what I'm trying to raise with Building Smart and OGC, but also at ISO. So, it's one of the points that I want to raise within the roadmap is, it's all very well that we've observed it, but what are we actually going to do? I'm fed up. I've got all of these Disney videos in the garage, and a granddaughter I won't be able to show them to. So, but the point is very valid. If we come back to Thames Tideway and the Victorian sewers and actually our underground utilities, how can we possibly be a smart city, London, when we don't know what's underground?
Right. I think that's a point at which we really will wind up. You've heard the most wonderful lecture from Anne. You touched on so many different things, and one of the privileges of being the current president of the Institution of Civil Engineers is to experience a whole lot of things that I hadn't known about or really appreciated, and one which comes to mind in your lecture was a few months ago. I attended the all-day conference at the institution, and the title of the conference was Inclusive Cities, and it was very much spearheaded by Ellie Cosgrove, who you've referred to quite a lot this evening. What was interesting about the Inclusive Cities conference was that it opened up a whole lot of new thinking. There were a lot of civil engineers there, of course, because it was held in the Institution of Civil Engineers, but there were a lot of social scientists. There were medical experts there. There were psychologists. There was quite a lot of talk also about mental health in the construction industry. But the whole principle of the inclusive cities was very much taking the points that you've made so well tonight about how engineers, civil engineers, when they're thinking about their infrastructure, the new infrastructure, to think about who it's for and to think about society. And that ultimately, all of us civil engineers, whatever we do, in any form of profession, we're actually serving society. And but you've touched on so many things there, and I just want to thank you very much on behalf of CSIC for delivering such a thought-provoking and most interesting lecture. Thank you so much.